Erosion, both due to both wind and water, is discussed on the next page of your manual, on page 16. Erosion is, we cannot look at the site today and determine how much soil has been lost due to erosion. So we have to go back to the site card and look at the original topsoil depth that's given to us on this site card. So the original topsoil depth is what was there initially before any erosion occurred, and we measure the topsoil depth today. Well, how are we going to know where the topsoil ends and the subsoil begins on one of these sites? That's something we have to evaluate at the site. And how we're going to do that is we'll be looking at the profile. Most often we see differences in textural class and or color. So as we're proceeding down in this profile, we might come down to a depth of, say, 20 inches, and we notice that there's a difference in root mass, the color changes, and or we get into a more restrictive or more compacted soil at that point in time. That would be something that would be a good indication to us that topsoil ended at that point and subsoil began. So that's something that will take a little bit of practice, and as we look at these tapes that we've done on the field exercise, there it will be illustrated to how to evaluate the depth of the topsoil. All we have to do is to take the topsoil depth as we determine it to be, subtract it from the original topsoil depth. This would give us a difference, and then determine what amount of erosion has occurred on that basis. If we look at the categories on page 16 of your manual, none to slight says that less than 25% of the original topsoil has been lost or removed. 25 to 75% is considered moderate, and if 75% or more of the original topsoil is gone, then it's considered severe. Very severe is also described as 75% or more, but also we'd have to have the presence of large uncrossable gullies that would prevent all type of cultivated agriculture from occurring. So let's take an example on this particular item. Let's say that we had original topsoil depth of 30 inches, and we're at the site and we evaluate it today to be 20 inches. Well, we've lost 10 inches of the original 30. So 10 of the 30 is 1/3, or approximately 33%. Which of these categories of erosion would that site fit into? Well, from looking at our card and our manual, we see that 33% fits into the moderate range. So on that particular site, or that example of that site, we would mark moderate erosion underneath item number F on our land evaluation card. Next item to be evaluated, surface runoff. Surface runoff is based primarily upon the slope of the land. Of course, the steeper the slope we have, the more likely we are to see water run off of that slope. But we also must take into consideration what the surface condition of the soil is, because that will definitely affect the rate of runoff. And when I mean surface condition of the soil, is it very cloddy or rough if it's been cultivated site? If it's a non-cultivated site, do we have a substantial amount of vegetation or plant cover there? Because that would, of course, would affect the potential for runoff. The more vegetation or plant cover, the more protection afforded to the soil surface, and therefore the lesser the erosion potential or runoff potential. So on page 16, as we read the categories underneath surface runoff, it describes rapid. It's basically talking about slopes above 25% with very little of other type of protection afforded. Moderate is slopes of from 3 to 25%. Slow is slopes of from 0 to 3%, and then very slow or ponded would only be used if we see the existence of water that has stood on that soil for a period of time and not been able to penetrate the soil and or been impounded on the soil surface. Most of the time, our surface runoff potential on sites with, unless they have very severe slopes, will be moderate. We can take a slope that is very steep, say 30-32%, which would put it into the rapid category, and downgrade that to moderate on the basis of good vegetative cover. You would probably not want to downgrade a slope of 32% to moderate if it were cultivated, even if the surface were fairly rough without vegetative cover, because, of course, when the rainfall does occur, we do get an effect from some splash erosion where the raindrops are striking that bare soil surface and disrupting or dislodging those soil particles, which allows them to be carried away from the site from any water that moves away from that site or doesn't go into the soil. So I would base my runoff primarily on slope, first of all, and realizing that it is very feasible to downgrade a rapid runoff potential to moderate due to good vegetative cover. I would, however, not downgrade a moderate erosion potential to slow due to vegetative cover, because it's not feasible to take a slope of 20% and downgrade that down to slow just because we have good vegetative cover. We would expect under higher rainfall situations or more intense storms that we would still get some runoff from those sites, which would take it out of the slow category. So with that explanation, how I would evaluate surface runoff potential is look at slope first and then look to see if there's any other things that would cause that runoff to be less rapid or not as fast, mainly the amount and type of vegetative cover. Grasses work very well as vegetative cover. Woody perennials would have less ability to protect the soil surface because they simply do not have the amount of surface area of the soil cover that we would see in the grasses.